Good morning, everyone. My name is Jerry Kendrick, and I'm here to introduce the moderator for today's session, the wide open prose, poetry, and photographs of the prairie. Before we get started, I just want to remind folks, if you have a cell phone, please turn it off. It's my pleasure to introduce Judy Blunt, who is the moderator today. Judy is one of the contributors to the Wide Open. She's an associate professor in the University of Montana's Creative Writing Program. She recently was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship and the Whiting Writers Award. Her memoir, Breaking Clean, won the Penn Gerard Award, Mountains and Plains Nonfiction Book Award, Willa Cather Literary Award, and was a New York Times notable book. And I also want to mention that there'll be a book signing at the end of this event. Judy?
Hi there. Here it is, the labor of love, the Wide Open. We have gathered an impressive array of contributors to this book in different ways. The book is divided into sections that reflect diverse and distinct points of view, all equally valuable, all necessary to form a complete picture of the place, sort of the what was, what is, and what will be of the shortgrass prairie. We have with us today Annick Smith, who is a writer, editor, independent filmmaker, and producer. She's received both the Western Heritage Award from the Cowboy Hall of Fame and the Montana Humanities Award. This is about 4-point font here, you have to forgive me. Her books include her memoir, In This We Are Native, Homestead, and Montana's Centennial Literary Anthology, The Last Best Place, which she edited with William Kittredge. She lives in the Blackfoot River Valley. Editing as I go here, yeah. Next to her is Susan O'Connor, an art advocate and philanthropist who lives here in Missoula. She serves on the board of the American Prairie Foundation and other environmentally conscious nonprofit organizations. Then we have Lois Connor. She's a photographer whose photographs appear in the Wide Open, and her work is included in collections at the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, among many others. Scott Laird. We joked about him being our token male, but he's far more than that. He joined the American Prairie Foundation in 2004 and is now the Director of Field Operations. He also worked with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation as a Regional Field Director, Lands Program Manager, and Director of Private Land Stewardship. So he's the feet on the ground in the Great Prairie Project that is sort of reflected in this book. The sections of the book are divided. Home on the Range is the first one, the one that my little bitty essay is in. And these are writers who write from the inside, experience of living or growing up on the Western Plains. Hunting and Gathering and Travels Across the Plains are two sections that include observers of the Northern Plains who have inhabited its scattered towns or set up camp on its open lands and speak to its effect on them as outsiders looking in. Often this point of view is more clear-eyed than that of insiders, especially when we speak of change. The natural history section are the voices of those who see the plains in a larger context, from its formation to its future, the role it plays ecologically and spiritually for all Americans. All of these voices gather for the purpose of protecting something precious, the last of the virtually pristine shortgrass prairie, and holding it in trust for the generations to come. I'm going to start the discussion by asking each of these panel members a very general question and ask them to speak to it. And then at the end, I'm hoping to have time to open it up to audience questions. So we'll start with Annick because she's next to me. And I'm
glad you didn't say the oldest.
Never. Never. count miles, not years. Annick and Susan together had the vision for this book. And I think the question actually might go to both of them, of why this book, why this topic, why now? Why the wide open? What was important about this subject?
Well, I'll start, although Susan really is the starting point, because she came to me one day several years ago and said, we were friends, and said, Annick, let's do a project. And I said, okay, little knowing what was coming next. And I said, what should we do? And she said, let's edit a book about the prairies. And we were both, she's on the board of the American Prairie Foundation, and I'm a great fan and had been out there and had written a book about tall grass prairies. And I don't know what this thing is with prairies, maybe because I grew up in Chicago and that used to be a prairie. And I read too much Carl Strandberg. But it sounded like a really good idea to me too. And so we set out on this adventure, and it was a several years adventure. I think we started, and you asked why the prairie?
Yeah, what makes this topical right now?
Well, for one thing, the big conservation effort that's going on out there, that's very topical. But also because prairies are sort of have become a sort of forgotten part of the West. They're so huge, and to the untrained eye, it looks like there's nothing there, but there's so much there. And so there was a question of trying to raise awareness in the general whole American public about the beauty and value and stories of the prairies.
So Annick told the story, and my part in it was that I very much loved this project, the American Prairie Foundation, and I fell in love with the land up there when I went up there to visit the project, and I wanted to figure out a way and work with Annick on how do we best represent this land and this place. And I couldn't think of any other better way than to get writers who we cared about and understood this place to write. And then because I love art and visual art, we wanted that to be part of the book too. And somehow it just all came together. And Annick said it was a long time ago. I really don't remember the whole thing. But it just sort of came together. And we really wanted to represent this land that we loved. And that was the main thing, I think.
I don't have to answer questions.
Annick, back to you again. What was your vision for the scope of the book? You selected writers, to speak to the different points of view that surround the prairie there. Who do you see as the audience for the book, and what do you think they'll take away from it?
Those are two big questions. The scope of the book, I think originally our idea, because it was something that was between Susan and me, it wasn't just me, was to try and find, our favorite writers, the ones we thought maybe were the best writers, although that leaves out some people who actually were asked and didn't do it because they were too busy.
Yeah.
People like Ivan Doig and Dee McNamer. And Deborah Erling, who would have liked to, but they just couldn't. And so it turns out that almost every writer in here is a friend of ours, mine, Bill's. And I just wanted to point out Stephanie Ambrose Tubbs, who's standing in the back.
In the back, yeah.
Stephanie wrote the preface for the book and had a great part in it. And I just want to honor her. For her part in that. So it was kind of like writing your friends and say, will you do something for free? Will you donate to Obama? Because it was all free.
Yeah.
Nobody, these very well-known writers and photographers were not paid for their work. We gave them a little token something at the very end because we had it, but they were not doing this for pay at all. And everyone did it, I think, because they realized, this goes to the second question, that this is an important effort, that if we could get a large, diverse audience to see the beauty and interesting things of the prairie and its worth in the American landscape, that would have accomplished a lot, and it was their gift to everyone.
So the part about the photographers, this is Lois Connor, who's a photographer in the book, but actually the first photographer was Lee Freelander, and the way Lee came to be part of it is our friend in Texas, Ian Glennie, saw, because of the style of the writers in the book, their literary style, that Lee would be a great complement to these writers. And it would just worked out perfectly for his, what he was photographing. And he wanted cottonwood trees, and we promised him cottonwood trees. and also, he had a lot of respect for Bill Kittredge and The Last Best Place and Annick Bill's book. So we got Lee, and we felt like his name would add a lot of credibility to the subject, and also his style, which is very literary and structural, would be very complimentary, but that all just sort of worked. And then Lee came, and he had a great time at the Prairie, and he got stuck in the mud a couple of times, but he actually came back glowing, and he told us exactly what he expected, I mean, in terms of quality and stuff. And then he suggested that he would like to work with Lois and Jeffrey. So that's how it all kind of flowed together. And then I think that the main thing with the photographers was they really were eager to, they knew the landscape. It's sort of like in the time-honored tradition of great expeditions, the photographer just was part of this whole rendering of the place, and it just flowed together in an organic way.
And we wanted to have the photographs presented in a way as if they were stories or prose or essays, complete in themselves and not as illustrations, definitely not as illustrations. So that's why there are portfolios rather than photographs spread through the book. Yeah. And I just want to say I thought it was a wonderful complementary conjunction of visions. Lee Friedlander being so wonderful at seeing the detail, the small thing, and then Lois with her great panoramas, just these beautiful panoramas, and Jeffrey with what I think is more like human artifacts on the prairie, what's left. So without my realizing exactly how that would come together, it was really fortuitous. I think it was just perfect.
Well, I think the photo art in the book is what probably elevates it above a lot of the other anthologies that you might see that are collected about this or for this reason or that. I know from experience how difficult it can be to translate the sweeping and complex vastness of a landscape into words. And there's something about the augmentation of the text with the photos that I think creates a more holistic view of what that land is. It's the heart of the land as well as those amazing panoramic shots. We'll go to Lois for the next question. What were your expectations as you set out to photograph this country? And, or perhaps feelings is the better word, as you're standing in the middle of the 360-degree horizon with the mosquitoes buzzing around your ears. But what did you attempt or aim to convey in your photos?
That's a good question. Well, I started coming out west to photograph. Well, I started coming out west in the mid-'60s with my parents. They thought we should see the whole country, and so little by little, one year we picked the west and southwest, you know, and we traveled and we camped, and you know, so we were in Yellowstone and the Prairie, you know, where the buffaloes were. I mean, the memories are pretty vivid from those times. And then in the late 80s, I decided to start making trips across the country, driving in my pickup truck and camping and staying in these places. And I made 7 trips by myself. Different friends sometimes came and met me, but, you know, I was out there in the land, which I really feel is essential for me to like live in the land rather than just travel for a short period of time. And so Lee Friedlander's a good friend, and we're always talking about where we've been and what we thought was interesting or good. And he'd been coming out west a long time, you know, picking different parts of the country to photograph in. And when he started with this project, am I talking too long? Probably.
No.
He said, you know, I've been photographing out in the Prairie, and wow, Susan O'Connor. You gotta meet her. And then, you know, Susan contacted me and asked me if I'd like to come out and photograph, and I'm like, tomorrow. But she said, oh, well, you know, the roads, you know, because I guess it was winter time, and, you know, I couldn't imagine, like, the roads being blocked. I imagined, like, 10-foot, you know, snowdrifts or something, but it was because of the mud thing. Yeah. And anyway, I didn't know that, and nobody told me about the mud, and the day that I ended up driving out there, I got kind of lost, and I think Sean gave me directions, and people gave me directions, and I was supposed to go out to a little safari to give me an introduction. And you know, sort of dusk came, and I still wasn't anywhere near because I had taken the wrong turn, and then it started to rain. And I had directions like turn at the, you know, 3rd rock next to the 4th sign that says, hey, here. You know, it was something like that. It was like, you know, so I'm like really concentrating. I mean, I think I had one night, I live in New York City, in between, you know, sort of, you know, I stayed there one night and I met you, and
You're the one that didn't show up that night?
I got there at midnight. And it was raining, and I didn't, nobody had told me about the gumbo, right? I knew gumbo, I lived in Louisiana for a while, so somebody told me about gumbo, I thought, I'll be there early for this. And so I'm, you know, driving, and they got me a 4-wheel drive thing, so I felt like really confident, didn't matter, you know. But then, you know, the car started going slower and slower, and I thought, my God, what kind of car is this? And the deer and the antelope were passing me, literally. I mean, animals were passing, and of course, you know, to see the lights, they're all out there. And I stopped the car once and got out to see if, I didn't know what I was looking for, but everything looked fine, and I just kept going slower and slower. But it was only little rain, so I guess not enough to make real gumbo. So it just slowed me up a lot. Finally, I got there and was introduced to this area again through the eyes of people that really care about it. And then I set out using Malta as my base, and I drove what felt like hundreds of miles like every day, and walked, you know, several hundred miles, and it seemed like a period of time that I was there, and just explored. And you know, you always have expectations of what you might make, and it's never what you end up making. I mean, I think with writing, it's probably the same. And I think that that's the great challenge, is to be surprised by what you see and have that move you. But I still probably haven't answered the question. I just, Lee said, you know, you'd be great out there with that camera because there's something about your format and the sweep of the land. And for me, I thought, well, there's that, but there's also, you know, a long history of the Prairie and the way it was inhabited by Native Americans, and then the ancients before them, and then the people that set up to try to herd. And So I'm interested in landscape as culture. So it was, where there, I'm interested in photographing the land where there's a sense of history. And so I really connected through the writings of the different writers that have written about it, through my own sort of fictionalized idea of the prairie. When I think of the prairie, I immediately have a visual sense. And then dealing with it on a real kind of visceral way, just something happens with the confluence of all those things. Sorry to take so long.
Well, people who are driving by or through sections of prairie often mistakenly believe it to be flat.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that all of the photographers recognize and show, is that this is an expanse, but it's anything but simple. It's a very complex piece of earth. And thinking that you can walk from here to the horizon is a common misconception.
Right.
Because it's about 2 or 3 miles of down and up between here and there.
And lots of, in some ways, lots of treacherous terrain, because there's, and then you're like surrounded, like when I was, the cover of the book is my photograph, and there's tons of rattlesnakes, and you can hear them. So it's like, there's lots of, activity, and if you stand on the land for very long, you realize you're not alone, and I think that that's part of the thrill of it, is, you can see the buffalo even when they're not there.
You can see who's coming.
Yeah, you can see who's coming.
We used to say we'd look out the window and see the rooster tail of dust, and there was still time to put the roast in the oven, because they had a ways to go.
But also you can see the weather, you can see, it's kind of a privileged place to be.
The mountains are fairly claustrophobic for someone raised out there, I know that.
Yeah.
It takes a while to get used to ducking. It's the chicken reaction to a shadow going overhead. Scott, I've got a quote here that was one of my favorites. Having been from a place that's now sort of involved in what the people say who still live there about the American Prairie Foundation, its inroads into the country, its acquisition of lands out there, and its conservation efforts in the midst of the land where I grew up and the ranch that I married. He says in an article, "I'm always careful not to say that the American Prairie Foundation wants to restore the prairie, because that is extremely offensive to everybody here. I think the people who've stayed here love the prairie. That is why it is still like it is." So his work is at the grassroots level of conservation in the region, and he has shown incredible generosity and great sensitivity to the people who still live there. And I guess my question to him would be, perhaps to talk a little bit about your role on the prairie there and, the conservation efforts at the grassroots level. But what role do you hope this book plays, would be the first question. And the follow-up would be, how do you think the book will be perceived by the residents there? Who knows?
Well, first of all, I think this project is extremely fortunate to have these types of things speaking on its behalf and bringing attention to this part of the world. There's a lot of Montana representation on the American Prairie Foundation's board and in its sort of bloodstream. There's 3 board members here in the room tonight, and one of our land contract people also, who helps us acquire these properties. But this, I think the people out there, in my short tenure out there, they have an extreme love for the land and extreme respect for it. And I think this book reflects that. When you see the folks that have born and raised out there, they'll come to Western Montana or somewhere else, but they're in a hurry to get back. As Judy said, a bit of the claustrophobic about the mountains. And it's like in the wildlife out there, they're sort of shaped and molded by that. And I think this book reflects that. The roughness, the powerfulness, the bitter cold, the steaming hot, the dust, the gumbo,
Mosquitoes.
the mosquitoes, the thunder, the lightning. It's just an extremely powerful place and quite humbling. And the people out there reflect that. And I think this book, its photography and the writings, it's very jagged, yet it's home. So I think that's, these types of books, it's going to add to the respect, I think, that this organization, this project has for those folks. That's what I think the effect the book will be. And your second question was?
Well, just speaking more to for me personally, it's a great relief to see people working in conservation out there that are of the mentality of the American Prairie Foundation. I was in an interview at one point years ago, and they were still talking about the Great Buffalo Commons at the time and that sort of thing. And the person prefaced his question by saying, well, it's pretty much agreed that in the land area between here and here, we have an expendable population. And he was talking about the people. He's talking about people who have 3 or 4 generations or 5 or 6.
So about your family.
Of my family. And we were expendable. And it's that attitude that's created this, if you sense any wall of hostility or resentment, it springs from that. And I think it's the efforts of people like you within the community and some of Sean, the people who are working out there with the people that are saying, hey, we're okay, you're okay, we're all okay. That's helping kind of mend some of the barriers. And so I'd really like to hear some of, a story or two about, coming onto the doorstep. Do you get asked in for coffee?
Well, you probably know half the people I'm knocking on their door. But,
All of them.
I think there is an overriding, call it fear, call it misrepresentation, call it unfamiliarity between conservation efforts and the people that were born and raised and live on the ground out there. This project isn't about eliminating anything. It's not about moving ranchers away. It's not about replacing cattle with bison. It's not about any of that. It's about permanently protecting an area that doesn't exist anywhere else. And we try and gain the respect of the landowners out there. Part of the reason this project is there is because they've taken such good care of it. Plus, it's just a hostile place, natural resource speaking. And we hope to promote that. Part of this, some of the confusion in the past with this project has been, it's just a 2008 version of the Buffalo Commons and the Big Open and all these kinds of things. And I'm the first one to disagree with that because, at least in my recollection of those movements, discussions, it's been pointed towards emptying humanity from the landscape. That, the settlers shouldn't have been here in the first place kind of approach. And we want to, this sterile place to replace that sterility. And frankly, what this project does is hope to elevate the human imprint, the human footprint on that place. I mean, it started a long, long time ago, as was mentioned earlier, all the way through the homestead days, all the way up to today, where there's active, viable ranches out there that don't want to go anywhere. They're struggling for all kinds of economic and social reasons, just like the rest of us do, but it's actuated out there. What are the kids doing? Are they coming back? What about the price of this and that? So it's a rough place, and all in all, our acceptance there's been both sides. It helps to sit down and talk and work things out and get to know one a little bit and let them know that you respect their way of life. You're not trying to eliminate anything. You're trying to protect what they've been protecting all their lives and their generations. There's been some folks that disagree with our project, absolutely, and they'll tell you that to your face. But they'll also say that it's private property and you can do what you want on your own land. Just keep your bison out of my haystack. And quite honestly, there's some of the most down-to-earth, honest, tell you how they feel type folks that I've ever met. And it's okay to disagree. And we have support out there and we have some non-support, but in the middle, as usual, is the bulk of people who are just kind of standing back and waiting and watching. And we're going to do what we say we're going to do. Are we going to be the good neighbor we say we're going to be? All these types of things, and they'll just sit back and sort of hold their opinion.
Yeah.
And but they'll still invite you in for the cup of coffee, even if they don't like you or your project. And if you're stuck in the mud, they're going to be the first ones to go get their tractor and pull you out. I mean, it's just the way of life out there. You help your neighbor.
They'll cuss you for driving on the roads after it rains.
Absolutely. You tore up my road.
Tore up my road. Yeah.
I want to ask a side question to
Sure.
both Laird and you, Judy. Do you think people in that area will read this book? Do you think it's something that they would, first of all, buy, second of all, read?
We'll probably give them a copy.
Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes people don't, I mean, they think they have the definitive, they know. It'd be about like reading a book about one of your children. You believe you already know him the right way, the only way. And they're not sure that they trust other people's interpretations, perhaps. One of our greatest forms of entertainment in a land that was late to the television, late to the electricity thing, was observing how other people, outsiders, came to respect our landscape. The stuff that we were used to. They'd come in with their tip of their nose frozen, and we'd say, yeah, it's a little brisk out there today. I mean, there was this way of seeing the guys set up a tent out next to a prairie dog town, right up on a bluff. And we'd say, well, the wind picks up here. Oh, that'd be fine. They wanted to be up high where they could see. And in the middle of the night, the wind picked up a little and rolled them up like a cigar and sent them across country. Like a big Tootsie Roll, their tent, and the people in it just rolled through the cactus. It was an unfortunate thing. The next night, they moved their camp down to the creek, and that's the night it rained and the creek came down. They had a rental car that looked like it had been through a NASCAR race backward by the time they got done, but it flooded the car. The car sat there, and they moved up into our bunkhouse and sulked for a few days till the creek went down. And what had happened is all the field mice had gotten up and sat up on the engine to get out of the water and chewed all the wires out. You got to respect the land, you know, but that was a form of entertainment. We didn't like make fun of them. We fed them. We put them up for the days there. But we always, it's sort of like you open this book and I can see my landscape through other people's eyes. And it's a renewing of what I know about the place, but also an expansion of it. And that's what I would hope that they would get from the book. Gotta love the gumbo, too. We've all got gumbo stories. Does anyone in the audience have a pressing question or a need to know something? Yeah.
You're asking me to ask Lois. As a photographer, do you see landscape by definition as being without people? There are no people in any of these photographs.
Well, I mean, that's partially the editing, you know, but...
Can you use the mic?
Oh, yes. I feel that the people are there because of the paths, the roads, I mean, you can see. I mean, I try to convey something about the history without the people, because actually, in a way, you see very few people when you're out there. I mean, days I didn't see anybody. But I had the prairie dogs and the snakes and the deer and the wind and it was always full. But I did make portraits of a lot of the ranchers. And I mean, in some ways they wouldn't fit in here. They're vertical portraits. And in some ways there weren't enough of them because you have to drive so far to find everybody. And but I there's no reason that there's not people, but I do feel that the people are there without literally naming them. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Her question was why, if she envisioned landscape to be without people, there was no people in the land or in the photographs. And for those of you who didn't catch the question, is there not? Oh, did you have?
I just would add to that. A lot of the folks out there don't want their picture taken, and we ran across this. There's been a host of articles.
They think it takes the soul.
It's not what they told me. been a host of articles and photographers, from the publications from around the country, from National Geographic to Reader's Digest to ABC News to all sorts of New York Times. And a lot of the folks out there really don't care for that type of thing. And they have people that come out that are on a short mission to catch a picture, write a story, get a blurb, and leave. And frankly, they may not have the time for that. And an individual that said to me one time, Scott, there's a reason I live 60 miles from nowhere. This is where I am, this is who I am, and I don't really need to be interviewed, photographed, and written about. And frankly, they usually get it wrong anyway in the publications then. And because most of them are out to prove a point. And so they'll use these folks to make that point. It often doesn't come out. And then it reflects on whoever invited them out to do the story in the first place. And so things like this that a bit more thought is put into, that really explains from the heart as opposed to the snapshot journalism, these types of things are much more valuable.
I think it's also possible too that sometimes people will approach an area like that and the people in it with an agenda, that they have stereotypes in their own mind about the backward rubes that live in the backwater country. I was asked at an interview one time with a person from People magazine, and we had a conversation, and she leaned forward kind of skeptically and said, "Don't you think you're a tad sophisticated to pass for a ranch wife?" As though I was supposed to have a pig on a leash and a pair of bale pants on. And the level of insult that is not uncommon in outsider views. Yeah.
Can you speak to the how the Nature Conservancy and the World Wildlife Fund looks at the Prairie's ecosystem compared to other ecosystems in the world?
Yeah, this is kind of backing up for the 30,000-foot view of things, but the reason there's many reasons why this project is here, and there was years of planning and evaluation that went into, okay, if we are going to, there was an original assessment done by the Nature Conservancy a number of years ago that says, okay, grasslands in the world are the least protected biome that exists. It's, 1 to 3%, very, very small percentage that are under some form of permanent protection. Yet they're the quickest to be plowed, built on, etc., to the use to be permanently changed. So they assessed where in the world can we do such a project, not just a little circle of grassland protection, but really landscape, truly conservation at a landscape scale. And they did their analysis, and some years later the World Wildlife Fund came in and said, we agree with their analysis. In fact, our own analysis virtually overlaid almost perfectly that in North America, if there's a place to do major landscape grassland conservation, it falls in this part of Montana, in northeastern Montana. And both of these assessments, global assessments, not just in North America. So those two organizations really started to bring attention from a conservation standpoint, started to bring attention to, there's not much of this stuff left, guys. What are we going to do about it? And where can we do it this day and age? And you can't just go in and the federal government buy up a bunch of land anymore, especially out in this part of the world. It's just politically a non-starter. So the World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy brought a lot of attention to grassland conservation. And in essence, the World Wildlife Fund, after their assessment, they said, okay, not only are we going to tell you where it needs to be done, but we're going to figure out how to do it. And there's been all kinds of talk about major grassland conservation for decades, but very little of it has actually taken place, particularly in a private conservation standpoint. And so that's how the American Prairie Foundation was born. The World Wildlife Fund isn't in the land ownership conservation business. They're a science-based organization, and they don't own land. They try not to. That's changing a little bit now since this project. But they said we need to create an organization that can actually buy it, own it, manage it, and physically build this reserve. And that's when they created the American Prairie Foundation and hired Sean Garrity, my boss, to figure out how to do it. And now World Wildlife Fund, they provide some financial support, but primarily they're the science and research and conservation network behind the project, and the American Prairie Foundation actually is the landowner. and manager.
There's a question there?
I guess I have two questions. I'm not sure I wasn't paying attention, but I'm wondering who your main audience is for this book.
She's asking who the main audience is for the book.
And this is the second one, just about the decision to put it in black and white.
Lois, do you want to speak to the black and white? The decision to do black and white rather than color?
I mean, me personally?
Sure.
Or, you know,
Just talking.
I think that, well, black and white rocks. You know, each of the photographers here works in black and white because I think, you know, it's hard to speak for other people, but I know them both pretty well. I think that it's more abstract and it's easier to conjure up a kind of fictional world. Color seems too rooted in the present, and not that black and white can't be very much about the present, but I think that color, we seem to read it in a more literal way, and I guess the fictive possibilities in black and white are greater. I love color photography, you know, I can sort of negate that, but for each of us, I think that it's the reason we work with black and white.
I think Annick and I really wanted black and white too to start with, because I really feel like it's a spareness, it's a structuralness that fits in with the literary style of the book and the writing, so that it all kind of came together. So I think we went with that black and white, and I would say that we wanted a broad an audience as we could get for the book. That was our audience. And also, we wanted the book to be very affordable. We wanted it to be like a piece of art, but very affordable. So.
I would
And you
hope
can
that,
thank Susan for a lot of that.
No.
And also the University of Nebraska Press, because we tried to sell this book in New York, and my agent and agent friends and publisher friends, and we sent it around, and they liked the idea. We thought the names alone would sell the book, and they said, no, it's too expensive to produce, and it won't make us enough money, so New York said no. And then we thought about places to go, and we liked the distribution network and the connection of place and the sort of sophistication of the University of Nebraska Press. And we went to them, and they said yes, very, very positively yes. And then they worked with us the book is designed by a woman named Katie Homans, who's a New York designer, who is a designer who does all of Lee Friedlander's books. And we were concerned about the quality of reproduction and the quality of design. And it's not that we didn't trust the University of Nebraska Press, but we didn't trust the University of Nebraska. We really wanted to make this look as classy as possible, and we were, willing to pay a little extra for that. And the University of Nebraska Press was the best press I've ever worked with. I mean, they were just willing to do anything we wanted to do. They've been wonderful, and so that's how that all came together. It was a New York designer, a Midwestern University Press, world-class writers and photographers, and we wanted to reach, just as many people as it can reach. I hope it gets into New York, and it's reviewed in Book Forum, as well as a brief review in Publishers Weekly. And we're hoping for more national reviews, so that it isn't seen as only a regional book.
well, I think it actually will do its most good outside of the region, because anyone who asks, why the shortgrass prairie? Why preserve something? I mean, they don't have a concept of why it's important or why it's complex. But they would. If they read this book and if they saw the pictures, they'd understand why the prairie and why now. Yeah.
I'll just add a PS to the audience question. I am a prime example of one who, having looked through it briefly, I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I am an interloper in your country, and I have grown to love it. But when I first came out here, I thought, I need my eastern roots, my rocks, my hills. What do you mean this is a great view, what do you see? Now I'm beginning to understand. I think this book has been enormously helpful in that, and not only that, it's so beautifully written and photographed.
There have been people, I have actually heard people talking about the prairie as being beaten down, eaten down, worn into the ground at the end of a drought, and to step off a horse and part what's left of the guard hairs and to see the tiny curled up, this is a landscape that waits and grows on the strength of one good rain. And it has survived the drought and the grazing, all of the indignities that we have visited upon it, and it's survived in a sustainable, or at least I think it's rescuable, if that's a word. Back there?
You said that it was about the past, the present, and the future. What about the future in terms of particular energy development?
He's asking, what about the future in terms of particular energy development? Does anyone, Scott, do you want to speak to that?
You talk about energy development, its effect on this landscape?
Yes.
Well, you get to another one of the reasons that was looked at in this global assessment of grasslands is mineral potential. And there's large parts of Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, the Dakotas that is certainly in the crosshairs for aggressive oil and gas development, absolutely. Fortunately, but again, as technology changes, you can't disregard these things. This particular part of Montana has, compared to other areas, has relatively low potential for oil and gas. Wind is an interesting one coming down the pike.
It has
Biofuels is an interesting one coming down the pike. There's other forms of potential fuel and exploration and extraction that are on the horizon. We feel pretty fortunate for this particular area around the breaks on north and south side of the river. The oil and gas potential is relatively low compared to a little bit further north up towards the Canadian border, a little bit further east towards the Dakotas. So that was one of the reasons in the evaluation. It had to do with the price of land, the population, oil and gas potential, all these percent of intact prairie, all these things went into why this project was focused right here. And that was one of them, and we're just on the edge of it. We're just on the edge of it.
The only drilling I ever saw was for water, and that was an ongoing, our water well was over 1,000 feet deep. And the water that came out of it would kill fish. It had enough alkali in it to not be usable in a garden. You couldn't irrigate with it. So.
And the artesian wells are 2,000 feet deep.
Yeah.
My question is about photography. How many years did you use to photograph the subject?
He asked how many years were needed to photograph the subject.
Well, I was out here less than a month working on this project, but I feel like I've prepared for the past 30 years. So, it's not the first time I've been in the West, nor is it the first time for Lee Friedlander or Jeffrey James. We're all very serious landscape photographers, and we make it a point to sort of explore, like we're seeing it for the first time every time we go out.
I had a follow-up question for that, which is that the landscape itself changes visually, visibly with the seasons,
right,
pretty radically. Did you make a choice to photograph all in one season, or all in the summer, none in the winter, or?
I think that we all came out at different times, so that it would all be covered that way. But a lot of it was just logistical when we could actually be here, and the roads were passable.
Yeah. And they did it for free.
We loved every minute of it.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
I'm hearing the terms short grass prairie and long grass prairie, I think, and I'm not really familiar with those terms. Just briefly, if you...
Annick can speak to that.
Well, tall grass prairies are basically in the Midwest. I mean, all the great corn country in the country, it was originally tall grass prairie. It's out of a glacial soil called Lois, And if you go there, like I wrote about this prairie preserve in northeastern Oklahoma, and that borders Kansas, and literally the grass was way over your head in any place that had a lot of moisture. And it was but in other ways it was like this prairie we're talking about. It was such rough land. The limestone, the stone layer was so close to the ground that it had never been plowed and could never be plowed. And therefore it was fairly intact, although it had been grazed a lot. Shortgrass prairie is in much drier areas. So it's like west of the 100th meridian, where the rainfall patterns begin to change. And so you have, there's sort of a mid-grass area in between, and then the northern plains, northwest plains are shortgrass plains because of the climate, because of the lack of rain. Is that?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure everyone knows that we, down at the Missoula Art Museum, we have the 3 portfolios of original photographs by these artists.
Oh, and
display.
it's so worth seeing. You guys have got to go see it.
Today at 4 o'clock, University of Nebraska Press is sponsoring a reception for Lois, the editors, and many of the authors, so please join us if you can.
And there's going to be a reading at 3 o'clock? 2:30. Of writers from the Wide Open, Mary Clearman Blue, Tom McGuane, Bill Kittredge, and maybe me.
And there will be a signing directly after, if anyone has got
After this?
After this, for anyone who has got their copy and wants to catch Susan O'Connor and Annick Smith in the flesh. And the photographer, of course, Lois.
If you want to purchase one, are they out in the lobby?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.